Hey everyone, this is Curb, and I bring you my Avantgarda deck profile. So I was actually kind of amazed that in my little poll on what decks you guys wanted to see next, the only Bronze Gate deck was the one that overwhelmingly won. Even though I'm mainly a Stoicheia player, I do dabble in Bronze, and this deck is definitely one of the ones that I enjoy playing. So I guess we'll start off by just kind of talking about Avantgarda's playability in the meta. So I am actually very surprised at how well Avantgarda has been doing. If you saw my little short, I did actually get first place at a 33-person locals this past weekend. And this deck has really just been overperforming, and it's been so consistent and actually just like really good to me. I think the deck is actually a lot better than people are probably giving it credit for. No one really gives Avantgarda a second look, but if you pilot this deck correctly and you're a good enough player, it will definitely get you good results as like almost any other meta deck. But with that out of the way, let's go ahead and head into the deck profile. Alright, so as always, we are going to be starting off with the ride line. Of course, starting off with Sora Period, your standard D starter. Do note that you do actually have to play this D starter. You can't play anything else, which is kind of interesting. Next up, we do have the Dark Verdict Findanus. He is the grade 1. When he is rode upon by the grade 2, if you have the grade 0 in the soul, you search your deck for a grade 1 strategy card, put it in your hand, and shuffle your deck. But if you don't reveal a card, you can actually call this card to rear. And the grade 2 in the ride line basically has the exact same skill, where if it's ridden over by an Avantgarda, you search your deck for a grade 2 strategy card, put it to your hand, and shuffle your deck. And then if you did not search, you can actually call them out. So most of the time, I will actually not call these cards out, because the way I've catered my deck, the soul is just so much more valuable than having a 8k or a 10k vanilla, because that's essentially what they are when they get called out. They don't do anything outside of being a booster, not even your best booster in the deck, and just being a 10k body, which can really just be anything else in the deck. So most of the time, even if I do draw into the strategy order, I will not call them out, because I want to be able to use the soul for other skills that I deem a lot more impactful. And of course, getting into the big boy himself, Avantgarda, we've got one skill here, the act once per turn. If your soul does have that Sora Period, you put a strategy from your aura into soul, you draw a card, this unit gets plus 5k, and it gets the continuous skill, that Vanguard once per turn. At the end of the battle it attacks, if the attack hit a Vanguard, or if you had Persona Road this turn, you counterbox 1, discard a card, stand this unit, and gets drive -1. So very funny interaction I guess I can mention is that this deck has a very poor matchup against what's called Prison, because it can actually imprison from soul. I'm sure most people are aware from that. And if you lose your Sora Period from soul for any reason, there is no real way to get it back into the soul, and you're basically playing a vanilla deck at that point. So make sure that if you ever play against Prison, you keep that in mind. But so far, not many people are playing Prison. It's kind of just like a dead in the water deck. Who knows, with the new promo, maybe a little bit more people will touch into it, go back into the deck, but I hope not, so long as I continue to play this deck. Right, so getting into the main deck itself, we do start off with the all-important Persona Ride. Of course, we are playing the 3 copies, and then we're actually playing the 4th copy of Persona Ride in the Chalice. So the Chalice just is another Persona Ride. Not really the need to justify playing this Persona Ride, because obviously you need a Persona Ride in order to actually activate any of your skills. But this one is a little bit more questionable, especially since you are a Bronze Gate deck and you want to be playing another order every single turn in order to actually let the strategy do its thing. But in most cases, it's actually totally fine. I've never really had it come up and be an issue, but most of the time I will actually just pitch this. Like if I get the operator, I'll pitch a copy of this to search this, because having the actual Persona Ride is just 10 times better than drawing into the Chalice, and sometimes you really can go through a game with only 2 or 3 Persona Rides, and the Chalice isn't always necessary. But if you do find yourself in a situation where you have to use this, it's not actually the end of the world, because we have another card that helps you actually facilitate it a little bit more. Alright, so next up, doing something a little bit different, I want to go over the order cards that we play in the deck, just because I think it's kind of important to discuss them when we're talking about Avantgarda. So the first one is the Kill Shroud. You search this off of the grade 1 skill when you ride to grade 2. When this card is put into the Soul from Aura Zone, you choose one of your opponent's rear guards, retire it. One of your vanguards gets plus 5k. This is a card that you're probably going to use the least. You basically only play it to be like a deck thin card, because you might as well get value out of your ride line than not. But otherwise, I don't really use this unless I'm in very desperate straits and I've gone through every single order in my order zone and I don't actually have a way to play another one. So this is kind of just a last resort. It does technically come up a little bit if your opponent has a really annoying rearguard that you just want to snipe and get rid of. But most of the time, just the fact that it's just a 5k and you really don't want to be using it on your first grade 3 turn when you do actually have to hit, you want to get as much power as possible, makes it that this card is not really that valuable. It kind of just sits there. I've had lots of games where it just sits there and I've never even used it. What I do use is the Bomber Strategy Dusting. So when it's put into Soul from the order zone, you choose one of your vanguards, it gets plus 10k, and your opponent can't intercept or play any blitz orders. So do note that that is for the entire turn. It's a blanket effect on your opponent. It doesn't just impact when the vanguard attacks, it does actually impact all of your attacks for this turn. But the most important part is that this card is your best Soul in target for your first turn, because it gives an extra 10k to your vanguard, so it makes it that much harder for your opponent to guard, and that much more likely that they'll actually just take the attack and let you get the restand, which is great because you get multiple drive checks. So next up, we do have the Reestablishment Dock. This is part of a combo that we'll see a little bit later, but it is just play with counterblast 1. When it's put into your zone, you draw a card and it gives all your grade 2 rear cards boost. You play mostly grade 2s in this deck, and even your grade 1 is a 10k booster, so just being able to see this combo on your first grade 4, it makes things that much better. Most of the time you don't actually get enough boosters, like you don't have enough cards to commit from hand to make like full columns, but sometimes you do. Sometimes regards get left over, like operators that you already use their skill. Another grade 2 that we're going to be talking about later. If things stay on board, it comes up for that. But the main reason we play this is it's another card that we can just search out, and another way we just deck thin even further. And then of course this is another card that just replaces itself, so you play it, you just draw the card back. So one of the good things about Avantgarda is its ability to deck thin, draw, consistently find its pieces, and just kind of compress the deck to a point where you're hitting a lot of triggers and having 2 Vanguard swings, which is kind of what makes it a pretty good deck. And then of course our last order is just going to be 2 copies of Death Winds. Thanks to us, I guess let's go over it before I start talking about my reasoning for the ratio. So when it's put into the Aura Zone, if your opponent's Vanguard is grade 3 or greater, you choose one of your Vanguards. It gets a skill that when it attacks, all your front row units get plus 5 until the end of turn. So this is, you only really want to put this one into Soul whenever you've Persona Road, because otherwise you're not getting the most out of this order card. So basically, since you're always going to be, if you're always going to be swinging twice, you're giving another blanket 10k to the front row. That, along with the Persona Ride power, means an extra 20k to your entire front row, which is very, very good. But my reasoning for playing just 2 copies of this, before we would play like 3 or 4, we now have the promo that actually makes things a lot more consistent. So I don't really feel as pressured to play as many orders in the deck. I've never really run into an issue where I run out or that I need more. It does kind of suck not having some extra copies, because sometimes you do like draw into them and have to discard them early in the game, and then you run out, especially since you want to be using Death Winds from turn 4 onward. But even just doing another dusting is not the end of the world. As you can probably remember from one of my videos, if you've seen them, dusting came up very, very handy in that particular video, but 2 has definitely just been working for me. Alright, getting into the grade 2s, we are starting off with the most important card that we got, which is Ala Dargente. When your Vanguard with Avantgarda and its name attacks, this unit gets plus 5k. So she is basically a automatic Death Wind on legs. So every time your Vanguard swings, she gets another 5k, which is pretty good. The only disadvantage to that is that, well, I guess we'll talk about her second skill first. But when she's placed on rear, if a strategy card was put from your order zone to Soul, this turn you Soul Blast 1, search your deck for a drop for 1 strategy card with a different card name. And the card put from the order zone to Soul this turn, you add it to your hand, and then if you search deck, you shuffle your deck. So obviously we're playing this card at 4 copies. She is just just the GOAT. She fixes all of Avantgarda's problems, and she is the main reason I feel comfortable playing only 2 Death Winds and only 4 strategy orders in total, because if you have the ability to consistently just call her over and over again, that's just another, every single time you call her, that's just another turn that you can use your strategy card, because you can just keep playing them from hand over and over. And even if you already have an order zone full of strategies, that's still pitch fodder for PGs, that's pitch fodder for Avantgarda's skill. She just does so much, and she's just another one of those cards. Not only does she deck thin, she is also a card that just kind of replaces herself, because as soon as you play her, you get another card to hand, whether it's from drop or deck. Preferably you want to get from deck, but you know, you can't have everything all the time. I will say that the fact that we're not playing too many orders does come up a little bit in the instances where you kind of run out of order cards to search from deck very, very quickly. But for her, it's not really that much of a problem, because obviously we have, we just need those strategy orders in order to do things. All right, so next up in the grade 2s, we do have 4 copies of Habitable Zone. So Habitable Zone is Bront Gate's cycle card. When he's discarded during the ride phase, so last one, put it to the bottom deck and draw a card. This card is very, very good. All cycle cards are actually really good. But unfortunately, the one downside in this deck is you can't actually use it when you ride into grade 1, because you do not want to Soul Blast your starter. But of course, you can still use it every other turn after that, or I guess your grade 2 and grade 3 turns, which is very good, because it's always nice to not lose advantage from riding up. And this card lets you do it. But we don't just play it for that skill, we actually do play it for its second skill, which is when it's placed on rear. If you Persona Road, you counterblast 1, search your deck for 1 set order, reveal it, add it to your hand, and then shuffle your deck. Until end of turn, you may play a total of 2 orders, and you play the next set order without paying its cost. So this card is very much basically part of the replenishment dock package. So obviously the entire point of the deck is to Persona Ride, and you do find your Persona Rides fairly consistently with all the draw and search we have in the deck. So basically what this card allows you to do is play the 2 orders. So you Persona Ride, you call down the Habitable Zone, you search out the dock, you play the dock, you draw another card, and then you can play another order from hand. So you can play the Death Winds and then put it to Soul, and then you still use its skill. And then now, since you have the dock, this card is a 10k booster. So just so many good plays to do with this. And not only the fact that this card actually fixes your gratis problem, because what you can do is, if you didn't draw into a Persona Ride to ride, you can, or let's say you draw into this later, and you have a Habitable Zone, you can go Chalice, you're under Persona right now, and then call Habitable Zone, who will allow you to counterblast 1, search for a set order. If you need a strategy order, you can certainly search for that, but most of the time you're going to have one. And you're probably just going to be searching for a dock. And then, assuming you need another strategy order, or you want to use one of the better strategy orders, you can just use your second order for the turn on that strategy order, play it, put it to Soul, and then you're all set to go. So Habitable Zone is just such a good card in the deck, even though he might not initially look at it that way. The one issue I have with him is the same thing with the lady, which is that you do run out of orders to search in the deck very, very quickly. So a lot of the times I sometimes find myself counterblasting 1 to not even search, but basically just to play those 2 orders per turn. Alright, getting into the next one, we do have only 3 copies of the Operator, as I call him, Fright. So when he's placed on rear, if your order zone has set order, which you're always going to have, counterblast 1, discard card, search your deck for up to 1 card with the same name as your Vanguard, or up to 1 product, but we're not going to talk about that. And then add it to your hand. There's some other junk about Wellstrut and Operators, but that's the only skill that we are concerned about. So this card is just a Persona Ride searcher. Basically, he is 3 more copies of Persona Ride. Most of the time, sometimes you don't really use him. If you draw into Persona and then you end up drawing to him, he's kind of a dead card. I end up pitching him for ride deck if I don't have a Habitable Zone, or if I want to keep a Habitable Zone. But with the dock, he does actually become a booster, so you can just slide him back and make him a 10k booster, which is definitely very good for the deck. But only at 3 copies, because with all the draw power and search power and deck thinning, I don't really find myself needing to have extra copies of Persona Ride, and I would rather just draw into the actual Persona Rides themselves. Alright, so next up, we do actually have a little bit of a tech slot here. I think that so far everything that I've shown you is probably best Avantgarda ratios, but you do have 2 flex slots, and I have chosen to fill those 2 deck slots with this is a Pronterhind Dragon. He's a double rare from set 5. He's an act once per turn, Soul Blast 1, you get to draw a card, but then you have to choose a card from your hand and discard it. But if your order zone has a set order, you get to add an extra 5k to him until the end of turn. So why am I playing this card? I wanted to have another just body, and I wanted to have a little bit of a better early game. So in your early game, you don't really have anything. This you can't use till turn 5, or turn 4. This you can't use until turn 3 because you're not an Avantgarda. This you can technically use, but you don't really care too much about it. So I wanted to just have another attacker, another body, and this card does really good in the sense that you're a piece-oriented deck, so you do the skill to actually filter a little bit more is just so much more appreciated. And the extra 5k really is good in the early game because that means he's a 15k attacker if he's swinging at a grade 1 Vanguard. That is a 10k shield, which is most of the time just going to be a 15k shield because most of the skills that give an extra 5k are not active until grade 3. If he's swinging at a grade 2 Vanguard, he's swinging for 15, which is still a magic number, calls for 10k. And if they, of course, that's probably going to be a 15k guard. But he's just really versatile. The one thing I don't like about him is that he does cost soul, and you actually don't have as much extra soul in this deck as possible. Obviously, I want to use this soul for habitable zone before I use it for him. But let's say I draw into him and I don't have any habitable zones. Then really I can just commit the extra 5k here and have that much of a better early game. So he's just kind of here for a body. You could take him out, maybe play a couple more orders, probably like another copy of Death Winds and maybe another copy of Dusting even, just because, like I said, you do run out of orders really quickly, and playing more orders would make it easier to actually search more and deck thin more. But at the same time, I do just really like having the nice grade 2 body. Alright, so getting into the grade 1s, we really only play one grade 1 that's worth anything, 4 copies of Hathaway, Canada Hathaway. So when he's placed on rare, if you have Vanguard with Blue Deathster, do note that grade 1s and 2, and of course the grade 3 are all called Blue Deathsters. You can Counterblast 1 and draw a card. So this is another card that just replaces itself. You slap it down, you CB1, and you draw a card back. So you played one from hand, and you got one back to hand. So basically, that's kind of the mission with a lot of the Avantgarda cards. They just replace themselves and make it so you don't lose any advantage from doing things. But when it boosts, if a strategy card was put into the order zone this turn, until the end of the battle, it gets plus 2k, making it a 10k booster. And then if it is in the back row center column, you countercharge 1. So basically what this card does is it allows you to swing with Avantgarda, even if you have 0 CB. Well, not if you have 0 damage, but if you have 0 face-up damage, you just boost with this, and then you can countercharge, and that gives you the cost for Avantgarda skill. Honestly, like, there aren't any problems with countercharge in the deck. Like, even though we lost Bulbul Mine from the deck, which I'm not really playing in the deck, but I think you could. But at the same time, this card kind of gives you all the counterblast or you need, because you're really only counterblasting for Avantgarda's skill in the deck. You're counterblasting for his skill too, but he basically just refunds himself. So it's really not that bad. You definitely want to see this card as early as possible because it lets you hit really good numbers, and it's just so free. But you know, it's always a prime removal target. But definitely one of the best cards in the deck. And then I guess just finishing off the grade 1s is your typical lineup, just the 3 PGs and the 1 Elementaria. Unfortunately, Jet is still a thing in the meta, so I would recommend still playing this over just the 4th PG. Maybe once Jet is finally crept out in, I don't know, set 13, you can take it out, but at the same time, set 13 has other things with triple drive, so, you know, we're never going to be able to escape this card. Alright, so getting its trigger lineup should be fairly self-explanatory. 4 and 8 crit. You have a restanding Vanguard. You need to play as many crits as possible. Crits win games, and you want to be able to see them as much as possible. I'm currently just playing vanilla heals, but you could totally just like toss in the effect heals. I find myself maybe not really needing the soul that much, and I don't really see any situation in which I would use it. I would rather just have a better number of 5 over 4 in most cases, but you know, there's really no problem with that. And if you do actually go up against Prison, you definitely want to be playing the soul in crits so that you can have excess soul and not just die by losing your starter. Continuing on from there, we just do have our 3 of is going to 3 fronts. Fronts are really good in this deck since you're always swinging Vanguard first, and of course you're swinging Vanguard twice, so you have 3 checks in order to actually hit the front trigger. And then your rear guards, which if you have the lady, she's already being pretty pumped up, and giving her another 10k just makes her hit that much bigger. I think in some of my videos she gets up to 50 or 60, and obviously front triggers are part of the way we get there. Of course, we are just playing the 4 vanilla heals. No reason to play counter heals unless your meta really calls for it. Personally, our meta is very diverse in our locals, so I feel just safer, just playing the vanilla heals. And then of course the Endo Breath. If you flip this over on an Avantgarda turn, you kind of just win there and then, just because like they're committing most of their guards to your center column, and if you use this to either like break through or you flip it over on your first check, game's over, because your Vanguard swings and then you have massive columns. I mean, literally, if you go into your first turn 4, you end up and you have both of the ladies in columns. They are sitting at, let's see, they're 20 under Persona Ride, 30 from their skill, 40 from their from the Deathwind skill. So if you flip this over while you have double lady in the front row on turn 4, those ladies go up to 2 crit and 80k, because they proc while the Vanguard attacks and not during the drive step. So basically, if you flip this over offensively, you just win. That is Endo Breath, that is over triggers, that is unfortunate. Alright, we're going to go ahead and just finish off the deck profile with a quick test hand. So opening up the top 5 cards, we do have a very good hand here. Persona Rides are always a keep, Hathaways always keep, Ladies definitely keeping, and then of course these cards, PGs, we don't need in the early game. Deathwinds, not going to be good, and we can search it out with this anyway. So we draw another card, we draw into another Persona Ride, kind of unfortunate. 15k shield, not terrible, in case our opponent decides to rush us. So we're going to shuffle up the deck and then go into this turn. So the one thing we are kind of missing here is some habitable zones, so we are going to be minusing from actually riding up, but that's not the end of the world. So we're going to go ahead and draw for turn. Drawing into a mechanic, probably not necessary. I already have 2 Persona Rides, so we're just going to pitch him. He's probably the least useful card in the deck. Our opponent's going to go. You definitely want to always take the first damage. Hopefully they don't hit a crit, and that is deeply unfortunate, because this is one of your most important cards for the early game, which means we're going to go into this next turn and go ahead and draw a card. Ooh, very nice. We draw into a habitable zone, so we are just going to be discarding that, riding into the grade 2. Do note that you probably want to search out, this is basic card economics, you want to search out the grade 1 order. That's not the grade 1, that one is, before you actually draw with habitable zone skill, as we're going to Soul Blast the grade 1 and put it to the bottom of the deck in order to just draw yet another card, kind of just paying for our ride deck cost. Unfortunately, draw into the operator, which we still do not need, but that's a good pitch target for next turn. We're going to play our order. Sometimes I forget to play the order, but please be better than me and actually remember. So calling the Hathaway, drawing another card, drawing to another operator, another card that we don't need. Theoretically, what we could do here, or next turn, I suppose, is call it and then Persona Ride, search, and then of course we're going to boost, countercharge, drive check into a front. What we're looking for here is kind of a heal, because we really want to heal this out, because we can at least get it back from the drop zone in that instance. So we're going to take another damage, hitting it to a heal trigger. Our opponent's at 1, so we're just gods, and we just heal out that grade 2 that we desperately needed to heal out. Getting into the drop is the most important thing. So I'm going to go ahead and stand. Let's actually take another damage, because I want to have 2 CB going into this turn. Actually, I don't even need the second CB, but we're going to go ahead and draw. We drew into a habitable zone, discarding it, and then riding into the Avantgarda, using habitable zone skill to Soul Blast 1 and bot deck this card. So this is kind of what I'm saying, like, I would rather just get the extra draw from habitable zone, get another card, as opposed to just getting a 10k vanilla. It's just so much more value that you get from the soul than you do anything else. So in this instance, I do have 1 CB. What I'm going to be doing is calling out the operator using the skill to counterblast 1 and discard. In this instance, I'm just going to discard this because I don't actually have a habitable zone to use it with, and I probably won't even be using it for a while, just to basically swap a Persona Ride for a Persona Ride. In this instance, you're kind of just deck thinning, and you're also you're not even losing any cards. Unfortunately, he is kind of just a break even. Just the one thing I really don't like about him very much. But you know, a card is a card. Unfortunately, if we had the grade 2 in Soul, or if we hadn't damage checked the grade 2, we would have just added it here. But in this instance, we're just going to use the kill shot just to get the restand skill, an extra 5k to the Vanguard. I do have 2 copies of her, but I do want to kind of preserve them for my next turn. So I'm just going to call 1, Soul Blast out the order I just put in, and search out the Death Winds for next turn. So my next turn is looking to be actually pretty good already. So we've reached our first grade 3 turn, and we've hit into basically everything that we need. We had a little bit of unfortunate with the dusting going to the damage zone, but we're looking at a very good first grade 3 turn here. So we are going to actually be boosting with the Hathaway, swinging at the Vanguard. He gets 5k from his skill, 5k from the order, and then with a 10k boost, that is a total of 33. Of course, we want to use the skill to countercharge, not only because if we actually hit, we will be able to use its skill, but also because since this is our first grade 3 turn, we want to have as much pressure on the first swing, because if we don't boost with the Hathaway, there's a chance we don't even restand. Let's say our opponent PGs this, so we're going to drive check 1, drive check 2, hit into a heal trigger, probably not going to be going off at this instance, but we can still give the power to Freiheit. Then the lady is going to swing for 15, and then Freiheit's going to swing for 20, which against the grade 2 Vanguard are both really good numbers. So let's say we go into this next turn, take a couple of damage, probably not the OT, hopefully, take 1, take 2, and you can see I have plenty of defensive cards in my hand. I have PG, I have 20k shield, 2 15s, and then a bunch of 5ks in addition to my order and Persona Rides. So you really can decide just like how much damage you want to take each turn. You can guard the easy to guard attacks, and then just take the ones that are difficult to guard and things that you would rather just like save for later. So going into this turn, I do basically, let's say I guarded a couple of attacks, guard with that, guard with this. Going into the next turn, the only thing that we're really missing is a habitable zone. So if we can actually draw into one with one of our various draws, then we are going to be super golden. So we're going to draw for turn. Drawing into a Hathaway, which is not the worst because we do actually have a ton of turns to draw into that, or definitely a ton of draws to draw into the habitable zone. We're going to be playing our order for the turn, using the Avantgarda to put it to soul and draw another card. Unfortunately, we drew into the second Death Winds, but you know, it is what it is. We're going to push this back, call out the lady, Soul Blast out the order that we put into soul this turn, and then add back the dusting, because that's definitely the one that we care more about. Add it to the hand, and then we can continue to call as we call another Hathaway, use its skill to counterblast 1 and draw 1, drawing into a heal trigger. Now if we actually wanted to dig a little bit more, we could call this over here, and then Soul Blast 1, draw 1, discard 1, dig for that habitable zone, because once we have that habitable zone, this becomes a 15k booster as opposed to this 10k. But since I am actually just a little bit more of a conservative player, I'm probably not going to do that, and I'll just wait for when I get my habitable zone. But anyways, this is still a very, very strong turn as we swing the Vanguard under Persona Ride, 5k from his skill, and then also another 5k from the Death Winds to the entire front row. That's going to be a 33 by itself. Drive check 1 into a critical trigger, very good. Drive check 2, Hathaway. So in this instance, we're going to go ahead and counterblast 1, discard a card. This card really isn't doing anything, so discard that, restand, and then now we can boost with the Hathaway. We do get to countercharge, basically using Avantgarda's skill for free. This is now 48 with an extra 5k to the front row, and then of course a 10k boost. We drive check 1, drive check into another critical trigger. So if they had PG that attack, or we can put the crits here and here. Unfortunately, we don't have the docking replenishment dock, so this is going to be her weakest swing. She is 20 under Persona Ride. She gets another 10k from her skill and another 10k from Death Winds, so that's a total of 40, whereas this is swing for 50, because Hathaway does get 2k whenever he boosts, so long as your strategy was put in, or an order was put into the order zone this turn. He doesn't really care what he's boosting. You just don't get the counter charge unless he's in this center column. Alright, so that's going to do it for the deck profile. I know that one went on for a very long time, but there are a lot of cards to explain. I think this might even be like... Well, no, I did Messiah, so this isn't my first Bronze Gate deck profile. But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed. Don't forget to check out all the fight videos that I'm doing with Avantgarda this week. I hope you guys enjoy them. Don't forget to do things, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.